Judge Alan Matthews thought he could break Marcus Stevens with his mocking racist cruelty. For weeks, he humiliated the young black lawyer, pushing him to the edge in a system built to keep him down. But when fate twisted the roles, Marcus sat in the judge's seat, ready to deliver the justice Matthews never believed he deserved. The shock of what happened next will shake even the most hardened souls. But let's start from the beginning. In the heart of New York City, Judge Alan Matthews was a towering figure in the legal world, known for his harsh, no-nonsense demeanor. In his early 50s, he'd long abandoned any illusion of neutrality. His decisions were often influenced by his personal biases, a trait that earned him both respect and fear. The legal community had grown used to his controversial rulings, but there was one person who refused to cower: Marcus Stevens. Marcus, a young black lawyer, had spent years rising through the ranks, fighting not just for his clients, but for his own place in a system that seemed determined to keep him down. He had proven himself time and again, and his confidence in the courtroom was undeniable. But that day, as he stood before Judge Matthews in a packed room, he faced a challenge unlike any before. When Marcus began his opening statement, Matthews cut him off with a sneer. "Perhaps you should go back to law school," he mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. The courtroom erupted in laughter, except for Marcus. His words were an insult, not just to Marcus, but to everyone who had ever struggled against the biases embedded in the justice system. The room, tense with the weight of systemic injustice, felt it. Marcus's confidence wavered, but he didn't let the sting of the judge's words show. This moment, cruel as it was, wouldn't define him. He'd faced worse challenges in his career. He took a deep breath, steeled himself, and pressed forward. He knew one thing: this was just the beginning. The ridicule didn't stop with that one cruel remark. Over the following days, Judge Matthews made it a point to belittle Marcus at every turn. In hearings, he would dismiss Marcus's arguments with a condescending tone, his sharp words laced with disdain. Each time, Marcus felt the sting of Matthews's contempt. It was as if the judge was intent on reminding him, in front of the jury and everyone else, that he didn't belong. Marcus's colleagues, who had witnessed the judge's behavior firsthand, offered their support in hushed tones, their faces sympathetic but silent. They knew the truth. No one dared challenge Matthews. He was a powerful figure, untouchable by most. Despite their sympathy, none were willing to risk their careers by standing up against the judge's blatant cruelty. The days dragged on, and Marcus began to feel the weight of it all. Every morning as he walked into the courtroom, the familiar bitterness of the system hit him anew. He had spent his entire career pushing against the forces of bias and inequality, and yet here he was, still fighting for respect, still fighting for the right to be seen as equal. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was personal. This was about proving to Matthews, and to the world, that he belonged in that courtroom just as much as anyone else. Each time he spoke, he could feel the undercurrent of doubt in the room, a quiet whisper of, "Who does he think he is?" But Marcus was resolute. His voice mattered. His presence mattered. And no matter how hard Matthews tried to break him, Marcus would stand tall, determined to prove that he would never be silenced. A month later, Marcus found himself in an unexpected, yet deeply satisfying position. A reassignment had come down the chain. Judge Matthews was removed from his current cases, the target of an investigation into alleged misconduct. By some twist of fate, or perhaps a sense of karmic retribution, Marcus Stevens was appointed to take over Matthews's former role as the presiding judge in the very courtroom where Matthews had humiliated him. As Marcus entered the judge's chamber and took his place at the bench, a quiet sense of vindication washed over him. The gavel that Matthews had once wielded so carelessly now lay in Marcus's hand, heavy with the weight of both history and responsibility. This was no longer about defending his own dignity. This was about something far greater. He wasn't here to dominate or to impose his power. He was here to uphold justice with integrity, compassion, and fairness. Marcus understood all too well that the law was meant to protect everyone, not to reinforce the systemic biases that had tainted the legal system for so long. When Matthews entered the courtroom for what would be his final hearing, his eyes locked onto Marcus sitting at the bench. The shock was instant, his confident stride faltering as he froze. The reversal of their positions hit Matthews like a physical blow. The once towering figure of authority was now standing before the young black lawyer he had once mocked, powerless. The courtroom, filled with those who had watched their past interactions unfold, grew uncomfortably silent. The weight of that silence pressed down on everyone in the room, charged with the history of what had come before and the tension of what was about to unfold. It was a moment of pure, unspoken justice. The power had shifted, and with it, the air in the room seemed to crackle with something much more than just the law. As Matthew's case unfolded before the courtroom, Marcus could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him. The very same courtroom where he had once been humiliated now turned into a stage for his quiet, powerful transformation. Matthews, ever the picture of arrogance, tried to maintain his usual demeanor, but something was different now. His sharp words lacked their former sting, and his attempts at intimidation felt hollow. In contrast, Marcus was calm, focused, and unyielding. He didn't just rule with authority, he ruled with dignity. Each decision was made with the precision of someone who had fought, not just for his place in the law, but for something much larger, the idea of justice itself. Marcus was no longer the young, ridiculed lawyer who had once stood at Matthew's mercy. Now, he was the embodiment of what justice should be: uncompromising, fair, and unwavering. With every ruling, he made sure that the shadow of Matthew's past misconduct didn't influence the case. He was determined to make sure the law wasn't swayed by bias or personal vendettas, something Matthews had so often done in his career. When the final verdict was read, the tension in the room was palpable. The outcome was clear. The case had been won in Marcus's favor. But the true satisfaction didn't lie in the victory itself. It was in the realization that the system had, even if only for a moment, been restored to its proper balance. Matthews, who had once wielded his power with a ruthless disregard for fairness, would now face the consequences of his actions. This was more than just a legal decision. It was the moment when justice had righted the scales, when a man who had been belittled and mocked had proven that no one, not even someone as entrenched in the system as Matthews, was above the law. As Marcus walked out of the courtroom, he could feel a profound sense of peace settle over him. It was more than just the satisfaction of a courtroom victory. He had reclaimed not just his dignity, but the dignity of everyone who had ever been oppressed by a system that had too often been skewed in favor of the powerful. The weight of history, of all the injustices that had come before, felt like it had been lifted, if only for a moment. For Marcus, this was the moment when the scales of justice had finally balanced. It wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a small but significant victory for fairness in a world that often tilted toward those who least deserved it. In that moment, Marcus realized that his fight was never just about him. It was for every voice that had been silenced, every person who had been pushed aside, every injustice that had gone unchallenged. And though the battle was far from over, this victory was a powerful reminder that no matter how deeply embedded the biases were, change could come.